There are nights a man spends the rest of his life trying to forget. And then there are nights he tries just as hard to remember, because somewhere between the fear and the uncertainty, something inside him changed forever, for Ronald Reagan. That night unfolded on a rain-soaked train platform in the spring of 1934, the kind of night when the world feels heavy enough to bend your shoulders and dark enough to make every doubt louder. The rain had been falling nonstop since sunset, drumming against the metal roof of the station like a steady reminder that the world outside didn't care who you were or what you were running from. The dim bulbs hanging from iron fixtures flickered now and then, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked concrete. And there, standing alone with a worn suitcase at his feet, was a 23-year-old Ronald Reagan, cold, drenched and exhausted not from the rain, but from the weight of everything pressing against his chest. He wasn't governor. He wasn't a movie star. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't even sure he was someone worth becoming. He was simply a young man on the verge of giving up. Giving up what? He wasn't sure. That was part of the problem. The platform was almost empty, except for a tired-looking station clerk reading a newspaper and two strangers arguing softly near a vending machine. A dull yellow light reflected off puddles on the platform, and the air carried the sharp, metallic smell of wet steel. Reagan stared at the tracks as though they might whisper an answer to the question he'd been avoiding all day. Should he leave? Should he walk away from everything he had tried to build? Should he quit before the world made the decision for him? The events that led him here had spiraled quickly, too quickly. Just hours earlier, he had lost the radio job he had been counting on. Not because he wasn't good, not because he didn't work hard, but because the station was cutting costs during the Depression, and youth was the easiest thing to sacrifice. He remembered the words as clearly as the rain hitting his coat. Ronnie, we're letting you go. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. He had smiled politely, thanked them, shook their hands like a gentleman, and the moment he stepped outside, the smile fell and something inside him cracked. Radio had been the first place he felt truly seen. The first place his voice meant something. The first place he tasted a future that felt like it could be his. And just like that, it was gone. He spent the rest of the afternoon wandering through the town, staring at shops closing early, men waiting in bread lines, families huddling together as though to shield themselves from a world that had forgotten them. Everywhere he looked, he saw people struggling, and for the first time he wondered if he really had anything worth offering. If he wasn't fooling himself, by evening, he found himself buying a one-way train ticket to Chicago, a city where he knew no one, where he had no job waiting, where he wouldn't have to face the shame of returning home and admitting his dreams were slipping out of his hands. Now, standing on the platform, the ticket folded in his damp pocket, Reagan felt the full weight of what he was about to do. He wasn't just running from failure, he was running from Cecile. He whispered aloud, as if needing to hear the words to understand their meaning. What am I doing? The station clerk didn't look up. The arguing couple had left. The rain answered for them all, as Reagan bent to pick up his suitcase. He felt someone step up beside him. He turned. Startled, an older man stood, their mid-60s, tall but slightly stooped, with a thick gray coat and a hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the rain. His face was lined, weathered, and familiar in the way of someone who has seen far more of the world than he ever wanted to. But what struck? Reagan wasn't the man's appearance. It was the way he was looking at him, not judging. Not curious, just knowing you look like a man trying to decide whether he's running towards something or away from it. The stranger said, voice calm, but edged with something sharp. Reagan didn't answer at first. He wasn't sure how. I guess I'm not sure, he murmured. The man chuckled softly. Most aren't, until it's too late. Reagan studied him. Do I know you? No, the man said simply. But I know what that look means. What look? The look of someone who thinks quitting will hurt less than failing. The words hit Reagan harder than expected. He looked away instinctively, as if the man had reached inside a very private part of him. I'm not quitting, Reagan muttered. The man raised an eyebrow. Son, you're standing at a train platform with a suitcase and a storm at your back. That's a quitting posture if I've ever seen one. Reagan didn't respond. Because the man wasn't wrong. They stood in silence for several moments, listening to the rain. Finally, the stranger spoke again. What are you leaving behind? Reagan hesitated. My life, he said softly. Or the one I thought I was building. The stranger nodded. And what do you think you'll find out there? Reagan shrugged. A fresh start, maybe? Fresh start, the man repeated, as if tasting the words. Or an escape. Reagan opened his mouth to deny it. But something inside him stopped. The man's eyes softened. Listen, son. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was your age. Reagan waited. The platform felt suddenly tighter, smaller, as if the world had shrunk to the space between them. Life will give you many chances to run, the man said quietly. And every time you do, it'll seem easier than staying. But running becomes a habit. Before you know it, you're 50 years old, and you can't remember one thing you didn't walk away from. Reagan felt his chest tighten. The man continued. And the worst part? You'll wake up one morning and realize you weren't running from the world. You were running from the part of yourself that was trying to grow. The rain filled the silence like applause for a truth no one wanted to hear. Reagan swallowed. Hard. That's not what I'm doing, he whispered. Though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself, the man smiled not kindly, not cruelly, but knowingly. I didn't say it was. He nodded toward the approaching distant lights of a train. But you're the one who has to know the difference. Reagan followed his gaze. The train's headlights glowed faintly through the rain. This was it. This was the moment. His moment, the stranger stepped closer, lowering his voice. Tell me something, son. If you leave tonight, what do you want tomorrow to look like? Reagan froze. Of all the questions he expected, not that one. Not the one that mattered. I don't know, he said. I thought I did. The man nodded. That's the trick of quitting. It always feels like clarity until you start answering real questions. Reagan stared at him, then at his suitcase, then at the empty tracks stretching away into the dark. The rain softened. The lamps flickered. The world felt suspended. Finally, Reagan asked the question he didn't want to ask. What if the life I want isn't possible for me? The stranger's expression changed, subtle but profound. A sadness passed through him like a shadow. Then you fight for it anyway. Reagan looked at him. Even if I fail? Especially if you fail, the man said. Failure is proof you tried. Quitting is proof you gave your future away without trying. At all, the whistle of the approaching train grew louder. Reagan felt every muscle in his body tense. The stranger watched him. Carefully, you're at a crossroads tonight, son. We all get one. And how you choose here. He paused. Will echo through everything you ever become. Reagan's breath shook. He felt the weight of the ticket in his pocket. He felt the ache in his chest. He felt the quiet desperation of a man unsure of his own worth. But he also felt something else. A faint, flickering spark buried deep inside him. The stranger stepped back. You don't know me, he said softly. But I know this. You're meant for more than disappearing into a city where no one knows your name. Reagan clenched his jaw. The train screeched as it approached. Slowing as steam rolled across the platform, the stranger's voice dropped to a whisper. Son, don't run from the life that's trying to find you. Reagan looked at the train. Then at his suitcase. Then at the stranger, and for the first time all night, he didn't feel like running, he felt something else entirely. But before he could speak, before he could ask the man who he was, why he cared, how he understood so much, the stranger stepped backward into the fog and vanished. Just as the train doors opened, Reagan stood frozen, between two futures, and he knew. Whichever one he chose would change everything. The train doors remained open longer than they should have. Long enough for the steam to lift in twisting clouds. Long enough for the conductor to glance impatiently toward the platform. Long enough for Ronald Reagan to feel the tremor of a decision forming inside him. He stood there without moving. The damp ticket clenched between his fingers. The cold rain dripping from his coat collar down his spine. The platform lights flickered, casting weak halos across the puddles. Every sound, the rumble of the engine, the hiss of steam, the low murmur of the approaching midnight seemed to echo one question: what kind of man do you want to be? The stranger's words repeated like a pulse inside him. Don't run from the life that's trying to find you. Quitting becomes a habit. The part of you that grows is the part that stays. Reagan felt something shift, something small, something fragile, but something real. He looked toward the fog where the stranger had disappeared, but he was gone. Cleanly, completely gone, as if he had never been there at all. For a moment, Reagan wondered if the man had been a dream, a projection of his own doubts, a figment of stress and rain and exhaustion, but his heart knew better. He wasn't alone on that platform. Not truly. Not in the ways that mattered. The conductor called out again. Last call. Reagan closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how long the storm inside him would last. He didn't know whether he was walking toward greatness or mediocrity or heartbreak or purpose. But he did know one thing. Running felt wrong, deeply wrong. He stepped back from the train. The doors closed. The whistle blew. The engine groaned to life. Sparks trailing beneath the wheels as it pulled away from the station, carrying with it the version of Reagan who might have disappeared into anonymity. He stood alone on the platform again, but not the same. Man who had arrived. Something inside him had been claimed, not by fate, not by destiny, but by choice, the kind of choice a man never forgets. It took him several minutes to breathe normally again. Adrenaline had flooded him with tremors. Fear and relief mingled in his blood like oil meeting water. He felt lightheaded, but not weak. He bent down, grabbed his suitcase, and turned toward the station exit. But as he walked, he felt a strange pull, a sense that something was still unfinished. He turned back toward the tracks. The fog had thinned slightly, and there, beneath the faint glow of the final lamp, something small lay on the ground. A glint of metal catching the weak light. Reagan approached slowly. It was a silver pocket watch. Old, heavy, engraved. He picked it up. Turning it carefully in his hand, there was an inscription on the back, "To JH, for the choices you still have left." Reagan's breath caught. JH. The initials stirred something familiar in him, but he couldn't place them. Not yet. He flipped the watch open. Inside the cover was a tiny, delicate photograph, faded, but unmistakably that of a young man in uniform. Barely older than Reagan himself. A soldier. The stranger. But the date carved at the bottom froze. Reagan's blood. 16 years before that night? Impossible. He stared at the photo again. At the face. At the eyes. At the Joy and E. It matched the stranger but younger, yet the math made no sense. If the stranger was the young man in the photo, he should have been in his 40s. But the stranger Reagan had spoken to looked older than that, 60s at least. Maybe 70. And yet, the resemblance was undeniable. A chill traveled down Reagan's spine, not of fear, but of the strange, inexplicable way life sometimes folds back on itself, as though the past and future take turns whispering through people we meet only once. He turned the pocket watch again. To JH, who was he? Why had he been there? Why had he spoken to Reagan at the exact moment he needed someone to? The station lights flickered again, breaking him from his thoughts. When he finally walked out of the building and into the rain, he knew with absolute clarity he had not met a random stranger. He had met someone who understood him before he understood himself, and that encounter, brief, mysterious, and unforgettable, saved him from disappearing into a life he would have regretted. The days that followed were strange. Reagan returned to the radio station not for his job, which was gone, but because he didn't know where else to go. He swept floors. He organized records. He offered to read commercials for free. Anything to stay close to the voice he was trying to grow. People began noticing him again. One day, a sportscaster didn't show up for a baseball game. Reagan was asked to fill in. That broadcast changed his life. Doors began opening where ceilings once hung low. People heard something in his voice: warmth, optimism, clarity. The owner of another station heard him and offered him a chance. A team scout heard him and recommended him to other networks, piece by piece. Reagan's life began forming around a voice he nearly ran away from, but he didn't forget the watch. He kept it in his pocket, always. He touched it before big decisions. He held it when he doubted himself. He opened it when fear tried to drown him. It became a compass not of direction, but of reminder. A reminder that he had almost quit, and a reminder that someone, somewhere had told him not to, many years later. Long after Hollywood, long after the governorship, long after the presidency, Reagan sat in his study sorting through a box of keepsakes. Nancy had gone to bed early. The house was quiet, in the gentle way homes become when children grow up and memories take their place. Reagan opened the old box and saw the silver watch. A tremor ran through his hand. He lifted it, ran a finger over the inscription, and opened it. The photograph was still there, faded further. Delicate but intact, he whispered into the silence. "Who were you?" No answer came, of course, but he felt something warm settle in his chest, the way a blanket settles over old bones. He thought about the stranger's eyes, thoughtful, haunted, filled with a knowledge Reagan hadn't earned yet. He thought about the initials. J.H., and then slowly, painfully, a memory stirred, a name from his hometown, a man his father once spoke of. A soldier who returned from the war, changed, quiet, carrying burdens no one could understand. A man known for giving advice to young boys before they left for bigger worlds. A man named James Harrington. He would have been the right age in the photograph, but the wrong age the night Reagan met him, except James Harrington had died years before that night. Reagan held the watch tighter. Was the stranger really Harrington's brother? His father? His commanding officer? Or had the initials been a coincidence? Or had the universe simply borrowed a face from a memory Reagan didn't know he carried? He would never know. But the truth didn't matter. The meaning did. Someone stopped him on that platform. Someone gave him a moment he needed. Someone prevented his life from collapsing inward. And whoever that man was, whoever J.H. was, Reagan remained forever grateful. He closed the watch gently, placed it back into the box, whispered, "Thank you, whoever you were." Then he turned off the lamp and went to bed. Reagan never told his children about that night at the station. Not because it was a secret, but because some stories are not meant to be explained. Some stories are meant to be felt, not told. Some stories are the invisible threads that weave a life into shape. And this thread, the night he almost quit everything, and the stranger who wouldn't let him, was one he carried quietly, faithfully, gratefully, until the end of his days. If this story stayed with you, your support helps keep these quiet memories alive. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, not for the algorithm, but to help these stories reach someone who needs them tonight. Thank you for listening.